Picture this. It is the year 186 BCE. You are a Roman father. Your household is secure, respected, affluent, well-connected, firmly anchored within the city. You have fulfilled every expectation placed upon you. A prestigious marriage has been arranged for your daughter. The alliance is advantageous, the dowry ample, the future assured. She is 16 years old, educated, carefully instructed, raised to obedience, modesty, and duty, everything required of a Roman bride. The wedding unfolds without flaw. The prayers are recited. The omens prove favorable. The feast is extravagant. Guests commend your generosity. Your daughter smiles at the proper moments. She performs happiness exactly as she has been taught. Then, when the public celebration concludes, something else begins. Your daughter is led away for the final rite, the one never explained clearly, never discussed in respectable circles, the one every Roman family knows exists but chooses not to acknowledge. As she is taken from the hall, she turns back a single time. Her eyes meet yours. There is a question there, unspoken yet unmistakable. You do not answer. You turn away, not because you do not love her, not because cruelty guides you, but because you know what is about to happen, and you know you are powerless to prevent it. This is a ritual so deeply buried within Rome that even ancient historians avoided naming it outright. What remains survives only in fragments. Legal language stripped of explanation, censored theatrical works, sealed chambers beneath temples, names carved into stone without context. What follows is not a legend invented by Rome's later enemies. It is drawn from surviving legal concepts, archaeological discoveries, and ancient writers who hinted at something they could not fully articulate. Taken together, these traces reveal something profoundly disturbing about the intersection of religion, law, and marriage in ancient Rome. Here is what scholars can state with confidence. Between roughly 300 BCE and 200 CE, Roman marriage was not merely a private agreement between families. It was also a sacred transaction. Legal sources indicate that a marriage was not considered complete until specific religious conditions were fulfilled, conditions overseen not by husbands, but by religious authorities. Later medieval writers would describe comparable ideas with the term ius primi noctis. That phrase does not appear in Roman legal texts, yet Roman sources point toward a ritual framed as an offering to the gods, sometimes reconstructed under the name deditio deorum, a symbolic surrender required before a marriage could be finalized. The language matters because nothing about this was defined as violence. It was defined as obligation. If you believe suppressed histories, especially those involving the powerless, deserve to be remembered, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support helps illuminate practices that were intentionally kept in shadow. Now, let us examine what Roman fathers never explained to their daughters. Act 1. The legal foundation. Under Roman law, marriage transferred a woman from the authority of her father to that of her husband. This transfer was called manus, literally, the hand. A woman passed from one hand to another, but legal and religious texts suggest this transfer was not automatic. Before a woman could fully become a wife, she first had to be purified. That word appears repeatedly, purificatio. Purification was not symbolic. It was a ritual act, overseen by religious officials described in legal terms as guardians of divine will, priests. Among the most prominent were those associated with Bona Dei, the good goddess whose cult centered on fertility, reproduction, and the protection of Roman households. Her rites were secret, restricted, and legally shielded from scrutiny. Roman religion operated through exchange. One offered something to the gods, and the gods granted favor in return: harvests, fertility, protection, stability. Marriage was no exception. But in this case, the offering was not wine, grain, or animals. It was the bride herself. Imagine what this meant in practice. You are 16, perhaps 17. You have been taught that marriage is your highest duty. You understand obedience. You understand silence. You understand endurance. What you do not understand, because no one tells you, is that before you belong to your husband, you must first belong to the gods. And the gods demand proof. Act 2. The descent beneath Rome. Archaeologists have uncovered subterranean chambers beneath major temples across the city. These spaces are not tombs. They are not storage vaults. They share unsettling features. Stone platforms shaped like beds, grooves carved into floors for liquid drainage, heavy doors designed to be locked from the outside. In 2003, excavations beneath the temple long associated with Bona Dea on the Aventine Hill revealed one such chamber in remarkably preserved condition. The most disturbing aspect was not the structure itself. It was the inscriptions. Carved into the walls were hundreds of names, all female, many accompanied by dates. When compared with surviving records, those dates correspond closely with known Roman wedding celebrations. British archaeologist Catherine Johns, who spent 3 years documenting the site, concluded cautiously that these inscriptions recorded women who had undergone a ritual connected to eligibility for marriage. She emphasized that the nature of the ritual was not explicitly stated, a phrase that appears often in academic writing. Signals restraint, not ignorance. What follows is a reconstruction drawn from literary hints, later commentary, and the physical evidence itself. After the public wedding, the bride was not taken home by her husband. He was excluded. Instead, she was escorted by female attendants, often older women who had experienced the same rite, to the temple. She was led downward, away from light, away from witnesses. Stone steps, cold air, a chamber beneath the city. Sources differ on what occurred next. Some suggest a single priest. Others imply several. That inconsistency is itself revealing. What remains are echoes. The playwright Plautus, writing in the early 2nd century BCE, alluded to such rites in a comedy that was later heavily censored. In one surviving fragment, a character remarks, "The gods take their portion before any man." Another asks what the bride receives in return. The response, "Purification, if she survives it." That line does not appear in later copies. The philosopher Lucretius, writing in the 1st century BCE, refers to the rites of Bona Dea in language unusually direct. His words survive only because a single manuscript escaped medieval erasure. He writes, "They call these rites sacred, but they are terror. What the priest claims to offer the gods, he takes for himself, and the law shelters the theft by naming it divine. Now place yourself once more in the position of the father. You know this exists. You know your daughter will endure it. And you remain silent because refusal would mean defying religion, law, and tradition. And in Rome, tradition carried the weight of inevitability. The system was built so that resistance meant self-destruction. And that was only the beginning. The system's power did not rely on force alone. It emerged out of silence. Act 3, the protocol of silence. What made this practice so hard to uncover, then and now, was never a shortage of victims. It was the law. Roman women who underwent sacred rites were not simply advised to stay quiet. They were legally barred from speaking. Certain ceremonies were designated mysteria, holy acts shielded by secrecy laws. Revealing them was not treated as testimony. It was treated as impiety. The Lex Fania passed in 169 BCE contained explicit rules on religious disclosure. Any woman who exposed the contents of sacred rites could be prosecuted for impiety and punished with exile, confiscation of property, or death. This is why the historical record feels fragmented. This is why historians run into gaps, euphemisms, and evasive phrasing. The victims were silenced by law. The perpetrators labeled it sacred. And the men who wrote history were often beneficiaries of the system itself. But silence is not the same as erasure. And when speech is forbidden, people sometimes find other ways to leave proof, to speak without words. In the 1920s, archaeologists excavating a villa outside Pompeii uncovered a sealed room. It was not blocked by volcanic ash. The doorway had been intentionally bricked shut before the eruption. Inside, they found a fresco. At first glance, it showed a familiar Roman wedding scene. The bride at the center, the groom beside her, guests gathered, all standard iconography. But in the background, partially hidden, another image appeared. A woman being guided downward by robed figures. Her body angled away from the celebration. her head turned back, one arm reaching toward a man who did not follow. The archaeologist who recorded the fresco noted something striking. The hidden woman's face, barely visible, was rendered with more precision and emotional depth than the bride at the center of the scene. Someone wanted that face to be noticed. They could not describe the ritual openly. That would have been illegal, but they could paint it, they could conceal it, and they could hope that someday someone would understand. That is not passive acceptance. That is documentation. Act 4, the aftermath. When the ritual ended, the bride was returned to the wedding celebration. Hours had passed, sometimes a full day. Roman wedding customs include a detail that puzzled historians for centuries. The bride appeared before her husband wearing a veil known as the flammeum, a thick, brightly colored cloth. What was unusual was not the veil itself, but the rule attached to it. It was never removed, not during the feast, not during the procession, not even during consummation. For generations, scholars interpreted this as modesty, a symbol of Roman virtue and decorum. But a closer reading of Roman medical texts suggests another explanation. Feminist historian Amy Richelin, examining ancient gynecological literature, highlighted a passage by the physician Cyrenus, writing in the 2nd century CE. In a treatise on women's health, Cyrenus notes that newly married brides often showed signs of recent physical trauma. He advises physicians and husbands that the veil serves two purposes. It preserves modesty, and it prevents the husband from noticing signs of the purification rite that might prompt improper questions. Read that again. The veil did not represent virtue, concealed evidence. The bride could not speak about what had occurred. That was illegal. The husband was discouraged from observing. That was custom. Any distress was dismissed as fear, nerves, or inexperience. The system did not depend on everyone believing it. It demanded obedience, and for generations obedience held. Act 5, the fracture. In 186 BCE, the structure nearly gave way. That year, a Roman woman, Hispala Faecina, appeared before the consul and recounted abuses inside the Bacchanalia. These were secret religious rites operating throughout Italy. Her testimony, preserved by the historian Livy, spoke of hidden chambers, sexual violence enforced through sacred authority, and victims bound by laws of silence. The Senate reacted with alarm. Investigations followed. Priests were seized. The rites were outlawed. Leaders were executed. Thousands faced punishment. Rome intended to make the Bacchanalia an example. But during the inquiry, something else occurred. Several women came forward seeking to testify about purification rituals tied to marriage. Rites rooted not in foreign cults, but in Roman tradition itself. The Senate refused to listen. Livy records that the consul Spurius Postumius dismissed their pleas with a declaration that revealed everything. The Bacchanalia are foreign corruption. The rites of bona dei are Roman tradition. Tradition is not investigated. Those words form the spine of every system that endures abuse. Label it ancient, call it sacred, name it tradition, and it becomes untouchable. The women who tried to testify were warned to stay silent or face charges of impiety. Most obeyed. One did not. Her name is lost. She stood in the forum and publicly described what had been done to her beneath the temple. Within hours, she was arrested. Charged with impiety and public obscenity, she was exiled to Sicily, barred from returning to Rome, forbidden to speak to Roman citizens. She vanishes from the record, but not everything vanishes. What remained? In 1964, archaeologists uncovered a piece of graffiti carved near the Roman Forum. The lettering and surrounding context date it to around 180 BCE, only years after the Bacchanalia scandal. It reads, "Tradition is what monsters name their crimes when no one stops them." Someone carved those words into stone at the heart of Roman political power. Someone risked everything to leave them there. And this brings us to what Rome could never fully erase. The ritual did not disappear, changed. By the late 1st century BCE, elite families began finding ways around it. Rather than submitting their daughters to full purification rites, they paid for symbolic ceremonies, rituals without chambers, without darkness, without physical contact. The priests accepted these substitutions. Of course they did, because this was never truly about religion. It was about power. Once wealth could purchase exemption, the system's nature became impossible to ignore. Among elite families, the practice slowly declined. Among the poor, it did not. They could not afford alternatives. The satirist Juvenal, writing around 100 CE, captured this divide with bitter precision. The poor still offer their daughters to the old gods. The rich offer gold instead. The system did not end because it was recognized as wrong. It weakened because those with power gained the option to opt out. And that line, who can escape and who cannot, reveals everything about what the system was built to protect. In the end, the ritual did not collapse due to moral awakening. It faded only because powerful men decided they no longer wanted it touching their own households. So long as the consequences fell on other people's daughters, it was defended as ancient, sacred, and necessary. The moment it threatened elite families, it became negotiable. That single truth explains everything about who the system served, and about what historians chose to ignore. For centuries, classical scholars minimized or dismissed accounts like these. They called the evidence fragmentary. They warned ancient sources were unreliable. They proposed exaggeration, misunderstanding, or later invention. They did everything except confront the pattern itself. Because acknowledging this practice leads to an unsettling conclusion, that Rome, so often celebrated as the foundation of Western law and civilization, wove coercion and sexual exploitation into rituals presented as sacred, legal, and righteous. To accept this is to acknowledge that Roman marriage was never simply a private agreement between households. In certain settings, it functioned as a transaction, one that placed women's bodies under religious control before handing that authority over to husbands. That understanding unsettles the familiar narrative of Roman virtue, stability, and progress. And so, scholars hesitated. They turned their attention to what could be admired without risk. They praised architecture, engineering, jurisprudence, while avoiding the harder question of what those systems demanded from people with the least power. Over the last few decades, that avoidance has grown increasingly difficult. Some things can no longer be set aside. Archaeology does not debate. Subterranean chambers exist beneath temples long tied to marriage and fertility rites. Inscriptions remain, names etched by women who left no other record. Legal texts survive, imprecise and euphemistic, yet persistent. Literary references endure as well. Censored, fragmented, but strikingly consistent in tone. Any one piece could be dismissed in isolation. Together, they reveal a pattern. In 2018, a research team connected to the American Academy in Rome released a comprehensive review of the available evidence concerning premarital purification rituals in Roman religious life. Their conclusion was restrained, cautious, and impossible to ignore. They stated that the evidence strongly indicates certain marriage-related purification rites involved coercive sexual acts, performed under religious authority and reinforced by legal and social systems that eliminated resistance and accountability. Translated from academic restraint into plain language, this happened. It was not accidental, and the system protected itself. But this is not only a history of abuse. It is also a history of resistance. Quiet, dangerous, easily erased, yet undeniably real. There was the woman who stood in the forum and spoke, fully aware of the consequences. She was not rescued, but she refused to participate in the lie. There was the artist in Pompeii who painted a hidden fresco, carefully shaping a face meant to go unnoticed, trusting that someone in another age might see it. There was the individual who carved a sentence into stone near the Roman Forum, calling tradition by its true name. There were families who quietly avoided the ritual, not by openly challenging the system, but by choosing their daughter's safety over unquestioned obedience. There were historians and scribes who preserved dangerous fragments, even when silence was safer. None of these people stopped the machine alone, but they recorded it. They left traces, and those traces outlasted Rome's power. This is how systems of abuse actually fall apart. History shows something Rome worked hard to conceal. Such systems rarely collapse because everyone suddenly agrees they are wrong. They collapse because enough people refuse to take part, because enough people withdraw consent, because enough people leave records, because enough people decide that tradition does not justify cruelty. The elite families who funded symbolic substitutes did not awaken to moral clarity. They acted from self-interest, and that proved sufficient. One family declined, then 10, then 100. Eventually, priests could no longer claim participation was universal. The ritual lost its sense of inevitability. And when inevitability fades, authority follows. You can stand in Rome today among the remains of these temples. On the surface, nothing appears remarkable. Broken columns, scattered stone, tourists passing without pause. But below the ruins, the chambers still exist. And on their walls, the names remain. Julia, Cornelia, Flavia, Fulvia, women brought here by their fathers. Women subjected to rituals they were forbidden to describe. Women who could not testify, could not accuse, could not refuse. So they did the only thing left to them. They carved their names, not as protest, not as rebellion, but as evidence of existence. I was here. This happened to me. They left those words without letters, trusting that someday someone might understand what they were never allowed to say. We found them. We understand. And we refuse to let Rome's version of history stand alone. If this revealed something you were never taught, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. This channel exists to uncover practices powerful institutions tried to erase. Before you leave, consider this. How many other traditions throughout history operated the same way? How many customs we call sacred were, in reality, systems of control? How many names remain sealed in hidden rooms, waiting to be seen? The Roman marriage purification ritual is not unique because it was exceptionally cruel. It is unique because enough evidence survived for us to recognize it. The machinery behind it, authority masked as holiness, violence reframed as duty, silence enforced by law, reappears across cultures and centuries. The question is not whether it happened elsewhere. The question is whether we are willing to examine our own traditions with the same honesty. Rome could not. Can we? The names are still on the walls, waiting not for revenge, but for acknowledgement. And now that we have seen them, we cannot pretend they were never there. We hear you.